Had I, in full hideous fact, been drawn back to a pre-human world of 150 million years ago, in those dark, baffling days of the amnesia? Had my present body been the vehicle of a frightful, alien consciousness from Paleogean gulfs of time? Had I, as the captive mind of those shambling horrors, indeed known that accursed city of stone in its primordial heyday, and wriggled down those familiar corridors in the lonesome shape of my captor? Were those tormenting dreams of more than 20 years ago the offspring of stark, monstrous memories? My name is Nathaniel Wingate Peasley, and those who recall the newspaper tales of a generation back, or the letters and articles in psychological journals 6 or 7 years ago, will know who and what I am. The press was filled with the details of my strange amnesia in 1908 until 1913. It was on Thursday, May 14th, 1908, that the queer amnesia came. The thing was quite sudden, though later I realized that certain brief, glimmering visions of several hours previous, chaotic visions which disturbed me greatly because they are so unprecedented, must have formed premonitory symptoms. My head was aching, and I had a singular feeling, altogether new to me, that someone else was trying to get possession of my thoughts. The collapse occurred around 10:20 a.m. I slumped down unconscious in my chair, in a stupor from which no one could arouse me. Nor did my rightful faculties again look out upon the daylight of our normal world for 5 years, 4 months, and 13 days. It is of course from others that I have learned what followed. At 3 a.m., May 15th, my eyes opened and I began to speak. But before long, the doctors and my family were thoroughly frightened by the trend of my expression and language. It was clear that I had no remembrance of my identity and my past. though for some reason I seemed anxious to conceal this lack of knowledge. My eyes gazed strangely at the persons around me, and the flexions of my facial muscles were altogether unfamiliar. Even my speech seemed awkward and foreign. I used my vocal organs clumsily and gropingly, and my diction had a curiously stilted quality, as if I had laboriously learned the English language from books. The pronunciation was barbarously alien, whilst the idiom seemed to include both scraps of curious anachronism and expressions of a wholly incomprehensible cast.
The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all of its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But someday, piecing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation, or will flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. I shall never knowingly supply a link in so hideous a chain. I think that the professor too intended to keep silent regarding the part that he knew, and that he would have destroyed his notes had not sudden death seized him. My knowledge of the thing began in the winter of 1927 with the death of my granduncle, George Gamble Angel, Professor Emeritus of Semitic Languages in Brown University, Providence, Rhode Island. Professor Angel was widely known as an authority on ancient inscriptions and had frequently been resorted to by the heads of prominent museums. So his passing at the age of 92 may have been recalled by many. And as my granduncle's heir and executor, for he died a childless widower, I was expected to go over his papers with some thoroughness, and for that purpose moved his entire set of files and boxes to my quarters in Boston. The first half of the principal manuscript told a very peculiar tale. It appears that on March 1st, 1925, a thin, dark young man of neurotic and excited aspect had called upon Professor Angel bearing a singular clay bas-relief, which was then exceedingly damp and fresh. His card bore the name of Henry Anthony Wilcox, and he called himself psychically hypersensitive. The sculptor abruptly asked for the benefit of the host's archaeological knowledge in identifying the hieroglyphics on the bas-relief. He said, "It is new indeed, for I made it last night in a dream of strange cities. And dreams are older than brooding Tyre, or the contemplative Sphinx, or the garden-girdled Babylon."
West of Arkham, the hills rise wild, and there are valleys with deep woods that no axe has ever cut. There are dark, narrow glens where the trees slope fantastically, and where thin brooklets trickle without ever having caught the glint of sunlight. On the gentler slopes there are farms, ancient and rocky, with squat, moss-coated cottages brooding eternally over old New England secrets in the lee of great ledges. But these are vacant now, the wide chimneys crumbling and the shingled sides bulging perilously beneath low gambrel roofs. The old folk have gone away, and foreigners do not like to live here. French Canadians have tried it, Italians have tried it, Poles have come and departed. It is not because of anything that can be seen or heard or handled, but because of something that is imagined. The place is not good for the imagination. It does not bring restful dreams at night. It must be this which keeps the foreigners away, for old Ammy Peace has never told them of anything he recalls from the strange days. When I went into the hills and vales to survey for the new reservoir, they told me the place was evil. It all began, old Ammy said, with the meteorite. Before that time, there had been no wild legends at all since the witch trials, and even these western woods were not feared half so much as the small island on the Miskatonic, where the devil held court beside a curious altar, older than the Indians. These were not haunted woods, and their fantastic dusk was never terrible till these strange days. Then there had come that white noontide cloud, that string of explosions in the air, and that pillar of smoke from the valley far in the wood. By night, all Arkham had heard of the great rock that fell out of the sky and bedded itself in the ground beside the well at the Nahum Gardner place. Nahum had come to town to tell people about the stone. They had dropped in on Ammy Pierce's on the way. Ammy was 40 then, and all the queer things were fixed very strongly in his mind. He and his wife had gone with 3 professors from Miskatonic University, who hastened on the next morning to see the weird visitor from unknown stellar space. seemed to be the side of a large colored globule embedded in the substance. The color, which resembled some of the bands in the meteor's strange spectrum, was almost impossible to describe. And it was only by analogy that they called it color at all. Its texture was glossy, and upon tapping it, it appeared to premise both brittleness and hollowness. One of the professors gave it a smart blow with a hammer, and it burst with a nervous little pop. Nothing was emitted, and all trace of the thing vanished with the puncturing. It left behind a hollow, spherical space about 3 inches across, and all thought it probable that others would be discovered as the enclosing substance wasted away.
It was then that he began that rambling tale which suddenly played upon a sleeping memory and won the fevered interest of my uncle. There had been a slight earthquake tremor the night before, and the most considerable felt in New England for some years, and Wilcox's imagination had been keenly affected. Upon retiring, he had the unprecedented dream of great cyclopean cities, of Titan blocks and sky-flung monoliths, all dripping with green ooze and sinister with latent horror. Hieroglyphics had covered the walls and pillars, and from some undetermined point below came a voice that was not a voice. Chaotic sensation which only fancy would transmute into sound, but which he attempted to render by the almost unpronounceable jumble of letters.
The essence was always the same. A person of keen thoughtfulness seized with a strange secondary life, and leading for a greater or lesser period, an utterly alien existence typified at first by vocal and bodily awkwardness, and later by a wholesale acquisition of scientific, historic, artistic, and anthropological knowledge. An acquisition carried on with a feverish zest and with a wholly abnormal absorptive power. Then a sudden return of the rightful consciousness, intermittently plagued ever after with vague, unplaceable dreams, suggesting fragments of some hideous memory elaborately blotted out.
Average people in society and business, New England's traditional salt of the earth, gave an almost completely negative result. Those scattered cases of uneasy but formless nocturnal impressions appear here and there, always between March 23rd and April 2nd, the period of young Wilcox's delirium. Scientific men were modestly affected, but it was from the artists and the poets that pertinent answers came, and I know that panic would have broken loose had they been able to compare notes. As was lacking in their original letters, I half suspected the compiler of having asked leading questions, or of having edited the correspondence in corroboration of what he had lately resolved to see.
crucial and most difficult part of my narrative. All the more difficult because I cannot be quite certain of its reality. At times I feel uncomfortably sure that I was not dreaming or deluded. And it is this feeling, in view of the stupendous implications which the objective truth of my experience would raise, which impels me to make this record. Primal myth and modern delusion join in their assumption that mankind is the only one, perhaps at least, of the highly evolved and dominant races of this planet's long and largely unknown career. Things of inconceivable shape, they implied, had reared towers to the sky and delved into every secret of nature, before the first amphibian forebear of man had crawled out of the hot sea 300 million years ago. Some had come down from the stars, a few were as old as the cosmos itself, and others had arisen swiftly from terrene germs as far behind the first germs of our life cycle, as those germs are behind ourselves. Spans of thousands of millions of years and linkages to other galaxies and universes were freely spoken of. Indeed, there is no such thing as time in its humanly accepted sense. But most of the tales and impressions concern a relatively late